Hi everyone, today we're going to be quickly talking about one of the first fully flexible assets within the region, within Asia Pacific. And we're very proud of this because we're the Flex team that are delivering this site. And even though we're responsible for 2 floors, circa 1,500 square meters of co-working, we worked really closely with the owner to figure out how to extend our serviceability to the whole 16 floors of the building, right? So this asset's about 16,000 square meters in size, slightly bigger from my understanding, because we had to do something to differentiate this building. Because this is in Auckland, New Zealand. It's not in the central business district. It's close but slightly removed. So the owners really wanted to think about how to differentiate this, make it different, make it a holistic experience. And this is a greenfield project, right? This is a new build. It's not repositioning or anything like that. So we got to get in pretty early with the strategic thinking and figure out how to do this. So today I want to explain to you some of the operational thinking and nuances behind it, because I do feel like this could be a good litmus test and case study to do more of this within the market. Because when I talk about, full flexibility, let me draw here. I might have to change the color of this because I'm going to be drawing on top of this image. Hopefully that works. We're responsible for these 2 floors here, and we have about 2 full-time staff, maybe 3. That might increase to 3 depending on its performance over the first year. However, aside from just being responsible for those 2 floors, we're also responsible for this ground floor and amenity piece, which I'll get to shortly, but also servicing all of these spec suites, right? And that's super exciting and super interesting because now we're really talking about truly what does it look like to hotelify a building? Not just leverage the fancy name and try and use it to differentiate your sales pitch or whatever. But now we've actually got, out of those 2 full-time staff, we've potentially got a full-time community manager that can roam up and down and service those spec suites. I think one of the most interesting things and important things, which hopefully will be new moving forward, a little bug here on the table, is that all of these spec suites are turnkey. So because of the infrastructure of the co-working space being integrated into the building, and I'm talking about the network and connectivity, it means that if someone signs a traditional lease in one of those spec suites upstairs, they don't have to mess around for 2-3 months finding their own internet provider, finding their telco and putting that in. They could literally move in the day after, right? So that's the advantage of having that co-working element within the building. It's almost a Trojan horse for all of these cool little toys when it comes to flexibility being integrated into the asset itself. So that's a huge differentiator, right? It really is, okay, let's move this, let's do it as flex. Now, in terms of the valuation of the building, maybe that's for another video, but so that you fully understand this isn't a super risky approach in terms of, oh, what does it look like for a whole building to be under a variable income style business case and model? Meaning, what does it look like for these 2 floors to be full co-working and then these floors to also be full co-working, so it's all variable income, and co-working doesn't look necessarily like that. Floors 3 to 16 are under traditional leases, maybe, shorter term, 3 to 5 years, right? Because all of those floors are already fully fitted out with meeting rooms, furniture, FF&E, so that a customer can just move in, kind of like a large enterprise suite within a co-working space. So because majority of that building is pegged to traditional lease income, it's only these bottom 2 floors that are under a co-working style variable income model, right? Now, I think what'll be interesting is if I explain to you what went into the thinking of the actual co-working floors. So let's say, and this isn't purely representative of what the floor plans look like and everything, I'm just using it to help explain the thinking behind it. And then here's the ground floor. And then down here, I'll just pretend all of these are the other floors, right? You've got level 1 and you've got level 2 here. And these are the co-working floors, okay? First and foremost, because these floors are meant to be something that really elevates the asset and the offering, the desk densities are a lot more spacious when we were looking at level 1 and level 2. So if we're talking about, let's call it a circa 1,500 square meter site, in a lot of traditional sites that you're privy to, that are trying to drive for a very high commercial outcome, some of them strive for a 5.5 square meter density ratio, which means they're fitting in 272 plus desks, right? And that might be 250 in private office and 22 open plan. Okay, that's what a very traditional operation could look like if it was just a co-working operator taking those floors, trying to re-rent the space and make as much money as possible. Because we had all of these other tenant considerations to accommodate, and because we were looking at what was available in the ground floor, and the brief and the directive from the owner was help us really differentiate this building, the density that we worked with was closer to a 9. Let's call it 8.5. I've got the actual numbers on my laptop, but we'll go with 8.5 because it was around about that. So instead of going for that level of supply, we went with an 8.5 square meter density ratio, which was more 176 desks, right? And that might be 150 in private office, right? And aside from the commercial implications of that, making slightly less money from desk income, which is your bread and butter when it comes to co-working and flex operations, when you think about it, suddenly from your NLA looking like a very dense, officey workers and farm, you suddenly get all this space back that you can put in more amenity-centric offerings in there, right? Cool stuff, right? So that when someone actually buys a desk within that space, they have communal areas that they can hang out with, lounge areas, wellness, podcast studios, a really nice, generous front of house and concierge area, on top of being able to use the wider amenities within the building. And because we're also responsible for the experience, largely, I would say, even though it's indirect for all of the spec suite customers within the asset, you don't want them to be coming down occasionally to level 1 and level 2 and just being like, oh, there's just more desks here. So that's food for thought for you if you're thinking about doing something similar as a landlord or as an operator. Another key thing that was very interesting for us is the ground floor was very rich in amenities. Like, we're talking really cool stuff. They had, a golf lounge simulator, an event space, all these really cool things, even a very, I would say, generous cafe area, which we looked into operating ourselves with a hospitality partner. But we felt because the footprint of the building, the area of the building, and because there was going to be our co-working tenancy and all these spec customers, and because the cafe was on the ground floor, that was actually there's a much stronger opportunity there for them to try and find someone to lease that space. Because you're essentially creating a food and beverage ecosystem for them to just hammer foot traffic and make sales with high ticket checks, right? Because aside from just selling to people on the street, they've got all these spec suite customers to kind of cater to. They've got the co-working element, and we'll be activating the space with catering packages that we use that cafe operator for. I think because there's so many different channels of revenue for that operator, it makes that economies of scale and margin for them really attractive. And that also helps the landlord because that should be a healthy tenant within the building. So that cafe area, rather than wrapping it under our operation, we advised to put out a RFP for that for an actual cafe operator who's going to take a lease rather than a partnership model. But what I was trying to get to is because all of these rich amenities were on the ground floor, that actually helped influence us not putting certain things within level 1 and level 2. So if I go up to level 1 and level 2, level 2, as usual, even when you go less dense, is going to be your workstation, your workhorse floor that generates a lot of the income. And yes, you'll have some front of house amenities and kitchenettes and breakout areas for that to breathe. But 2 is always the let's get shit done floor, And a lot of customers actually like that too. You'd be surprised. It's not always about having super amenity-rich floors when it comes to co-working businesses. A lot of customers just want to be in their area and don't want all this activation stuff happening near their office. So there is benefit and advantages for having not super dense, right, but worker floors, right? However, level 1, there were a lot of things that we didn't put in there. Like, we didn't put the event space. There were certain meeting room sizes that we didn't put in there because they were on the ground floor. Certain amenities, when you think about it, not that we were thinking of putting a golf lounge there, but maybe it was a podcast studio and all that kind of stuff we decided to put in the ground floor area, right? Because that was being marketed as something that was quite rich in amenity, which allowed us to be a bit more thoughtful with other amenities. It's like, oh, okay, if we don't have to put those in there, but we also don't need to put such a dense co-working operation on that floor, because this business is truly being valued as elevating the experience of the whole building. And the owner, frankly, would be much happier if levels 3 to 16 get fully leased out, because their spec suites and those floors are being differentiated because of the co-working floors in level 1 and level 2, as long as obviously we're still being profitable and running a good business. Well, then it allowed us to be super creative with level 1, right? And put different things. So it's kind of that balanced scale of commercial products and what works from an amenity and all these different nuances. And the reason why I have all these other like level 3 to 16 floors here is when you think about even those spec suite designs, because you're pre-fitting it out to go to market, right? They're not the tenants coming in and doing the whole thing. All of these designs were also influenced by what happens in level 1, level 2, and the ground floor. So even from a design strategic angle, everything needed to be considered, because you don't want to be double dipping. And then it means the spec suite floors can be way cooler too, because you're not trying to fit in all these things that those customers may need, because you get to put it in the level 1 co-working space and the ground floor space. So that's what you call, a very congruent and integrated design approach for the whole building, because you're thinking about it as a holistic asset and strategy, right? So yeah, it's a very interesting one. I mean, because we're, a flex team within JLL, we were able to even investigate, if I go back up here, what does it look like if we even also took care of some of the facilities management of the building. Because some of these assets in certain markets, they're not large enough. This one, let's call it was 16,000 square meters to justify a lot of on-site headcount. Whereas suddenly if I've got 2 FT in here responsible for the co-working, obviously not breaking their backs, but figuring out maybe you add another half headcount, a headcount to that team, well, then there's all this other stuff that you can do in the building too, from a facilities management, from a property management perspective. So this building here, I think, is a really good example of how to differentiate your building, especially if you're a smaller landlord trying to compete with the larger ones, right? Because I'm also not saying you need to do the whole fully flex thing. Imagine if you just did level 1s and 2, maybe you cut it off here, you only do like 3 floors of specs on top of that, and then the rest of the building, that's all traditional leases. Then it turns into a little section. Okay, well, hopefully that was helpful. Is there anything else that I wanted to cover on this? No, I think that's good. If you've got any more questions specifically about this building, please feel free to reach out. It's going to be live. It's finishing up construction now. It's going to be live sometime Q1 next year in 2026, which is super exciting. But till then, I'll maybe fade out to some renders and images of the space so you can have a look at what that looks like. But good luck, and I'll speak to you again soon.